Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spria-Bauer. Welcome back to the final episode of Season 5 of the Learning Can't Wait podcast. This was an incredible season filled with brilliant guests, thoughtful panels, and important discussions. We started off the season with the inimitable Erin Moat in the episode entitled Rowing in the Same Boat. I promise I didn't intend for that to rhyme, it just does. Erin, as always, shared her brilliance on this episode, talking about the work she's doing across the United States to support EdTech implementation, unification, really spoke without any barriers, telling, as she always does, what we need to hear to help move our education system forward. Unsurprisingly, the next episode with Asia Johnson, entitled Access is Not Optional, also knocked my socks off. Asia is a well-known principal in New York City, and she is well known for her powerful commitment to ensuring that every student has a high bar to work towards and reach to, and the supports necessary to accomplish their goals and beyond what they think is possible. In a surprising episode, that was episode 3 of this season, Dr. Stephen Weiner came on to talk about unconventional teacher roles. And why I say this was surprising is because prior to recording this episode, Stephen had released some research in the form of a paper about different ways that we can support both the teacher shortage crisis across the United States, but think about innovative ways to have qualified, high quality professionals in front of children. And unbeknownst to him, Full Mind is existing to solve that very problem. So we had a rich dialogue, touched on a lot of topics that felt very relevant to both his work at SERPI and our work here at Full Mind. Next up, we had a fateful episode with Chrissy Bill-Boline, the founder at Jumpstart Tutoring and the CEO at Vero Learning, entitled From the Classroom to the Workforce. Chrissy Bill and I met outside of a conference room at a conference in New York City and realized we had so much in common, both from our work today, but also our ethos and our philosophy around education. It was such an incredible episode where Chrissy was truly transparent in sharing all of her learnings as a founder, a 2-time founder, and also why she got into this work to begin with. And it definitely left me feeling inspired. Episode 5 was with John Dido Davis Jr. and Talia Milgram Elcott, entitled The Totality of Science Teachers, Solar Eclipse Special Episode. This episode preceded our monumental event that was the total solar eclipse here in the United States. And we had a special guest from NASA, John, and he's a science educator, and the incredible Talia Milgram Elcott, who is working extremely hard to get more science teachers in the classroom, and specifically more science teachers of color. This episode was timely, it was important, and it was fun. It also was followed up with an incredible Forbes article written by Talia that we'll link here in these show notes that you can read. And it is one I certainly will not forget. The next episode, Season 5, Episode 6, was led by Brett Rower, Jacob Canner, and Candace Sears, called The Forefront of Innovation. If ever there was a dynamic trio, this is it. These 3 folks are doing incredible work both in and around schools to ensure that the way we think about the tools we use in our classrooms is both thoughtful and premeditated. Candace shared some incredible work being done in Montgomery County ESC, where she works, and it really had me leaving this episode wanting to know more about their district, Candace's district, and also about the work that Brett and Jacob are doing. And you'll see more about that later on in this season as we get to some other episodes that were recorded, and in future seasons, as I'm sure you'll see these guests back on the podcast. Episode 7 featured the incredible, well-known, and absolute charter school icon, Doug McCurry. He is the former co-CEO and superintendent of Achievement First, and he's now a consultant. And his episode was called Lessons on Achievement. What does it take to lead a school successfully, to have a high bar for every single member of the community? This episode will tell you that answer. Season 5, episode 8 is one that is inked in my heart forever, with Brandon Cardette Hernandez. He is the Chief Strategy Officer of Mrs. Wordsmith, and this episode was entitled School to Home Connection. While he told us a lot about his work today at Mrs. Wordsmith and how he got here in his journey of school leadership and government affairs, Brandon also told a bigger story about the power that our relationship between school and home can have. I feel grateful this episode was recorded and that you all had an opportunity to listen to it. And if you happen to miss it, definitely scroll back. I've had many of folks tell me that this episode gave them the chills and made them feel empowered to continue their work. And I thank Brandon for his leadership and the way he shared his leadership on this episode. Episode 9 had repeat guest Juliana Finnegan, the VP of Educator Experience at Vivi. And this episode was called Technology's Place in the Classroom. While Juliana shared a little bit about the new resource for teachers that Vivi released, she also shared her infectious energy and endless spirit for this work and the importance of innovation and tools in every school and every classroom in America. Episode 10 featured Jessica C., the CAO, Chief Academic Officer of Zeta Charter Schools. Her episode was entitled The Profession of Professional Learning, and it was an absolute gift to both meet her and interview her. There is such poise and dedication and commitment to the work of ensuring teachers have excellent professional learning in Jessica's episode. It serves as both the philosophy and the blueprint. If you're looking for great ideas about how to get teachers continually growing and also books that will help them do that, do not miss this episode. Episode 11 kicked off a mini series, which was the very first of its kind for Learning Can't Wait. And I have to thank my podcast mentor, J.W. Marshall, for the suggestion to do so. This was a rural education mini series, and it was kicked off with Melissa Harris, Taylor McCabe-Yunke, and Alan Pratt. It was called Dispelling Myths About Rural America. If you're like me and your experience in education spans suburban and urban environments, this is the episode to start with. I learned so much in my research for this episode. I've become fascinated with rural education ever since working at Fall Minds, and the work that Melissa, Taylor, and Alan are doing in their respective spaces to ensure that there is equity in rural education really moves me. And I'm sure will have you interested in learning more, just as their episode did for me. Episode 12 was an interruption in the rural mini-series. And if you didn't listen to this episode, you'll know why now. We had the opportunity to interview Arne Duncan, the former U.S. Secretary of Education, in Chicago, both with audio and video. So if you haven't watched that episode, you can find it at fullmindlearning.com/podcast. It will link out to the episode and some other resources from this incredible interview. It was an interview of a lifetime for me. He is a bucket list guest. I have read his book, followed his career, know the impact he has had at the federal and local level for education. And I feel beyond honored he gave me the opportunity to spend time with him. His team was incredible and generous and thoughtful. And I will eternally be grateful for the people that stood behind me and supported me for this interview. I'm excited for what comes next. And this was a really special episode that shed a lot of light on how we scale up best practices at the federal level. We returned to the rural mini series with episode 13 with Michael Gonzalez and Richard right from the Rural School Innovation Zone and school leadership around rural Texas. This episode was called Collegiality in Rural Schools. So again, I mentioned how important it was for me to learn about rural schools. And this episode spoke to the resourcefulness and the collegiality, the compassion that rural schools show one another, and how they do more with less together. I was so excited both to meet these guests and learn from them, but also to have the opportunity to learn all about the Rural School Innovation Zone in Texas. The next episode featured two more leaders from the Rural School Innovation Zone, Conrad Cantu and Mike Barrera. The episode was called In Love with Rural America. And if you leave this episode without feeling warmth in your heart for rural America, I don't know what to tell you. I could feel the energy of their communities as I listened to them, what it feels like to walk down the sidewalk of a neighborhood in rural America, how well you know your community. It made me fall in love as well. Episode 15 featured incredible educators, Heather Bookstaver, Anne Lewis, and Taylor Gump. This episode was called Teaching in Rural America. And now you know, Learning Can't Wait listeners, how important and how much we revere teachers, both at Bullmine and for me personally as Hayley Spria-Bauer. But these folks have really wide experiences with rural America, both growing up in them and teaching in them. And they shared what it's been like in their unique communities, as well as in the case of Anne, how she's taught virtually in a rural community and how that compares to other communities she has taught in. And the final episode of the mini-series on rural schools was called The Study of Rural Education, episode 16 with Dr. Amy Price-Azano. It was incredible to meet the person who writes the textbooks about teaching in rural America. Both the wisdom, the brilliance, the patience that is required to do this work. And Amy has it, and truly felt like an honor to meet this incredible scholar. And finally, our last episode of the season, episode 17, featured Emmanuel George. It was called Civic Education at Every Age. And it told about the work that's happening in New York City at Democracy Prep Charter Schools. Emmanuel is the regional superintendent and leads many schools across New York City. It was an interesting juxtaposition to the previous rural series episodes, but really spent more time focusing on how both Emmanuel and the school that he teaches in and leads are focused on ensuring students are civically minded and connected to the work. It was such a pleasure interviewing Emmanuel and getting a chance to reconnect after our time together at a different school in New York City and hearing the incredible work he is building in his schools today. And I cannot think of a better way to end this incredible, powerful season 5. Thanks for joining us in this season, and there are some incredible episodes upcoming in season 6, and I can't wait for you to listen. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.